Hey everybody, welcome. I just want to say once again, we're so excited that you're here. If you're just hopping on with us, we're so glad you're joining for this webinar today, and we are going to be kicking it off in just about 1 minute, 3:30. So thanks for being with us. Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome. We're so excited that you are here for the webinar. We're going to kick it off here. We're so excited. My name is Stephanie Demerit, and I will be moderating our webinar today. I'm the Associate Program Director at Dream Centers Mary's Home. I'm so excited about the panel that we have with us today. I'll be getting to who those individuals are in a second. But thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend an hour with us. We hope that this will be a really helpful and engaging conversation. Just so you guys know, you should have on the right side of your screen questions in the sidebar. And throughout our whole conversation, if you have any questions that come to your mind, ways you'd love for the panelists to go deeper into what we're saying, or just random questions that come to your mind about this topic, go ahead and pop those questions in, and we will have a section at the end to do Q&A. We're so excited about that. It's always more fun when you guys engage and really be part of the conversation, so we can really tailor it to what you want to say. So you're in listen mode, and you can just go ahead and feel free to pop those questions in at any time. What are we talking about today? Just want to give a brief intro to this topic. We're really talking about a couple different pieces. We're talking about homelessness, and we want to kind of paint a picture of what are the different factors and different situations and different kinds of homelessness and pieces like that. And then we also want to talk about how do we talk to teens about this issue? How do we have that dialogue? 1 in 50 students in our community are experiencing homelessness, and then also teens, and really all of us, is a social media age, and so teens are aware, they're aware of these social issues that are going on, and so we're going to have this dialogue about how do we talk about this. And who is on this webinar today is actually adults and teens. So teens, if you are on this webinar, we would love to hear from you, especially. We don't want to talk about teens, we want to have a dialogue with teens. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're going to dive in by just meeting our panel. So we have 3 different individuals that have joined us today as panelists. We have Dream Centers Mary's Home Program Director, Mary Hoggett, and we're so excited you're joining us, Mary. We have the CEO of Catholic Charities, Andy Barton. Thank you so much for joining us, Andy. And then we have the Director of Outreach from Access, Courtney Maloney. And I'm going to go ahead and ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly and kind of give us a snippet of what their organization does for those of us who are not familiar. So Mary, would you go ahead and kick us off and kind of explain a little bit about Dream Centers Mary's Home?
Yes, thank you, Stephanie, so much. I'm so excited to be on this panel. I've been with Dream Centers since we started it back in 2015, and it has been my greatest honor to walk with the incredible, brave moms who come to Mary's Home in order to permanently exit homelessness. So obviously, homelessness is a big part of what we're addressing here, but it's really the bravery of these moms to step in and do what it takes to exit. So I love it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you, Andy, as well, for being on our panel. Would you mind just sharing what is Catholic Charities for those who are not familiar, and kind of what is it that you all are trying to do?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be able to be a part of this as well. Catholic Charities is the charitable arm of the Catholic Church. And so our responsibility, as we see it, is to serve our poor and vulnerable throughout the community, regardless of their faith background. And we do that by attempting to be a lighthouse for those who are in need and experiencing poverty, whether that is individuals who are experiencing homelessness or an immigrant community, or folks who are just living on the margin. Our primary facility in Colorado Springs is the Marian House, which is a service center for mostly individuals experiencing homelessness. There's a soup kitchen that serves a meal 365 days out of the year, and then provides a variety of services from healthcare to jobs. And then we also provide services for homeless families at our Helen Hunt Center and Family Connections, which is located downtown as well. So our job is to be out there and engaging folks who are in the greatest need and helping them to build resilience.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for what you guys do, and thanks for being part of this webinar today. Courtney, I'd love to hear from you. You are part of an organization called Access. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do?
Yeah, so we are also located in Colorado, but we exist to help bridge the gap between the older generation and the younger generation. So helping parents and kids have good conversations. And we do that mostly by equipping adults, parents, whoever they may be, to understand the world of the next generation, to be able to speak to them in a language that they understand.
Wonderful. It's a really felt need, I know. Thank you so much for joining, Courtney. So you can see on our panel, we have a couple different individuals who are working with individuals experiencing homelessness. And then we also have Courtney, and I just love that you're here, Courtney, because while Access does not specialize in homelessness, you guys really specialize in how to have those conversations with teens. And that's part of what we're going to be diving into today. So thank you for being a part. Our first where we want to go here first is kind of just understanding a little bit, exploring a little bit, okay, what is homelessness? What does it look like? What are the factors? What are the solutions? I mean, if you're in Colorado Springs, and really most cities, you've probably seen individuals panhandling. You've probably seen people maybe in the downtown area who seem like they might be experiencing homelessness. And we know that homelessness is a complex, multifaceted, difficult issue. And it's also, I just want to say up front, you're going to hear us talk about a lot of facts and a lot of different pieces of homelessness, but let's always remember that we're talking about people experiencing homelessness. This is not just an issue. It is individuals, people whose lives are really being affected by homelessness. So I just want to say that right up front. That's always our heart. So we're going to start off with a pop quiz, actually. And if you are on the receiving end of this webinar, if you're an attendee, you're going to go ahead and see a poll come up in front of you, and you can actually click whichever option you feel like is the best answer. So the question is, as of January 2019, the state of Colorado had an estimated blank people experiencing homelessness on any given day. So this is according to HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And so if you go ahead and just select whichever option you think it is. There's one in the 3,000s, one in the 9,000s, one in the 5,000s. We'll give you guys a second to select an option. Yeah, and one thing that we'll see, I'll just share while we're polling, is one thing that we see is kind of difficult sometimes to get an accurate picture of, you know, how many people are homeless, how many people are experiencing this, and how do we even make an accurate count? How does this work? So it looks like we have most people are selecting 5,478. Looks like this is the breakdown here. The actual answer is 9,619. So quite a few individuals, according to HUD, 9,619 can be experiencing homelessness on any given day. And that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people that are really experiencing this, and it's really affecting their lives. But one thing that's kind of difficult is it can be hard to get an accurate picture of who's experiencing homelessness. So even that number right there is probably not accurate because there are actually quite a few individuals who are trying to hide the fact that they're homeless. Maybe that they would lose their kids if it was found out by a school or somebody else that they were experiencing homelessness. And so I'm curious to ask you, Mary, kind of our first official panel question, what is hidden homelessness and what sets hidden homelessness apart from other types of homelessness?
Stephanie, I love this question because the true reason why so many of the hidden homeless are hidden is because they are protecting usually themselves and their children. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a story to kind of answer this. So one of our residents that lived here at Mary's Home, and this is actually true for many of them, she had 2 children and she was going from couch to couch to couch to couch. For instance, she would stay with her abuser. This man was father of both of her children, but he also was extremely abusive. So she would stay with him until it got to be too much. And then she'd go and stay with a friend until the friend said, you got to go. Like, I can't do this anymore. So then she'd go to another friend and then she'd go back to her abuser. So she had like 2 or 3 or 4 people that she would go around to because she was homeless. And the reason she was doing this is obviously she was trying to protect and care for her children, yet she also couldn't let people see that she was homeless because then her children would be taken away. And this resident that I'm speaking of was also, she grew up in the foster care system. And she vowed to herself that her children would never go into the foster care system. So she did whatever it took to make sure that she kept them. So the hidden homeless truly are those that are hiding that they're homeless, making it look like it's kind of okay, but typically not. And a lot of these come from domestic violence and are working really, really hard to keep together what they can, but it's really not working and it's falling apart. And usually just becomes more and more abusive, the situations that they're in.
So heartbreaking, just that there's so many people who feel that way, Mary. Thank you for sharing kind of a definition there. Andy, I'm curious to hear from you. Could you describe the individuals that Catholic Charities partners with? You know, what types of homelessness do you encounter at Catholic Charities?
Yeah, I think, you know, and Mary touched on this, and Stephanie, you did too, when you talked about where there are people experiencing homelessness. And so our homeless population looks in a lot of ways like anyone that you might see gathering in a downtown community. So of course we have folks who have kind of the typical look of homelessness just by virtue of living outside, who might be camping, who have limited access to laundry facilities and new clothing. That's an image that I think is pretty well ingrained in people's imagination, but we also have families who are coming to receive services. We have individuals who will walk through our door as if they've just come from a job, many of whom have come from a job, who are also homeless. And so in terms of identifying individuals who are experiencing homelessness, they can very much look like any of us on this call of all ages. And you mentioned we had 126 youth between the ages of 18 and 24 when our local point in time count, which is where that number is coming from, last year. So I think it's really important from our perspective to understand that we're dealing with situations and not with necessarily a specific type of person. And we're also seeing within the community in terms of what homelessness looks like, and you touched on this a little bit, the 9,000 number is a state number. That count in El Paso County was a little over 1,500, and we think that that's done on one day. We think that number in our community is probably closer to 4,000 or 5,000 individuals. And I think it's also really important. You can see on this slide that in our community we've got over 1,700 children, and that's just in the school systems. The school systems count homelessness. And those are children who are couch surfing or living with others or living in their cars or in motels. But there are a lot of folks who are experiencing this situation in our community, and they run the spectrum in terms of appearance.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you said that, Andy. They run the spectrum. There's so many different people that are affected by this and struggle through this, and it looks so different for everybody. So I'm curious, Andy, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what are some factors that you see that play into homelessness? And there's so many different ways you could take this, of course, but just maybe one or two factors that people might not realize that affect people's ability to stay in stable housing.
Well, you know, the first piece is the fact that there isn't a lot of stable housing available. And so that in any conversation we have locally around homelessness, I feel that that always has to be the central conversation. We live in a community where the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,200 a month. And we have 700 low-income housing units in a community that has 1,500 individuals at the very least. So the primary factor is quite simply that there is not enough affordable housing in our community. And so we see individuals who are coming in who may be employed, who may be not dealing with an addiction issue, they may have transportation, but they simply don't have enough money to be able to afford to live within the community. And the other piece I'll mention is, I think, as you said, it's really complex, but we see the breakdown of family as one of the main factors that leads to either the adults that we see who are experiencing homelessness, or that continuing cycle of homelessness within our communities. When families break down, when we have single parents who are trying to raise multiple children, the economics of that just make it really difficult. And so a single mom of 3 who has a job loss and might lose her car is very, very quickly vulnerable for being homeless, and it can take a long time to get out of that situation. So I think that second piece is the one that people may they may get intuitively, but that is our families are our most powerful support systems, and when they're not there, it can be catastrophic.
I appreciate you highlighting that, Andy, and I want to reiterate that. That's something that I've encountered at Dream Centers Mary's home, is an awareness of, wow, had a few factors been different in my life, I could have been, if something had occurred in my life, a trial, something that I wasn't expecting, job loss or something like that, I could have been very vulnerable and very quickly could have been in a very similar situation. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And Mary, I'm curious, do you have anything to add as far as what you see at Dream Centers Mary's home? Are there similar factors to what Andy is sharing from the population that he is working with at Catholic Charities? Are there different factors that are affecting homelessness?
Yes. Well, Andy, thank you so much. I love what you said there, and I think that is so clearly articulating, the pocket of homelessness that we're looking at. So often domestic violence becomes a part of that. In fact, on the HUD definition, domestic violence is one of the categories that says defines homelessness, because truly that is not a safe and healthy environment for the woman, for her children. And actually, in a conversation that I had with my son about homelessness, it was really cool to kind of pick his brain here. He said, well, homelessness becomes a pattern, because if the parent is homeless, then the child grows up normalizing homelessness, and thus it's easy to fall right back into that, because he is going into high school, and so he's wondering about teens that are there in his high school that are homeless, and that becomes normal, and that's what they expect of themselves. So I think that there's family patterns there that really need to be recognized when we're addressing the homelessness, the issues that cause homelessness.
Absolutely. Courtney, I'm curious to bring you in the conversation with all of the work that you do at Access with teens and parents and faith leaders. How aware do you think that teens are about the issue of homelessness?
Yeah, so Generation Z, which is basically kids and teens, and I'll talk a little bit more about how to define Gen Z, but they're an extremely aware social justice generation. So this isn't necessarily like a completely confusing thing to them. However, I would say, based on the research that we have done, homelessness is not one of the top social justice issues that many teens are talking about. But because there's such an aware generation, of course, we're generalizing, but because they're so aware, this is something that they see and care about because they're very passionate. But because they're such a digital generation, the issues that they're probably the most vocal and passionate about are typically those that gain attention on social media or more digital platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Can you just kind of, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with Gen Z, maybe they're like, Gen Z, are we onto a new letter, or, seeing it on the PowerPoint iGens? Can you just give us a picture? And I just want to say to the teens who are on this webinar, whenever I see a description of my generation, I'm always like, I don't know, this seems true, this seems untrue. So feel free to say this doesn't totally characterize you. I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts in the questions. But Courtney, just as broad strokes, can you kind of give some more detail into how do we understand, like, who are the teenagers right now? What characterizes them?
Yeah, so you can see kind of some basic outlining things on this slide. So Gen Z, it starts basically around those who were born in 1996. Now, keep in mind that that is a very generalized thing. Basically, generations are not an exact science. So there's a lot of demographers who disagree about this. And at this point, they don't even have an agreed upon end date. So that's just kind of the basic idea of when they were born. But they're a digital generation. They value individualism, social justice matters, all of those things that you see there. And they're an extremely large portion of the population. And so they have a lot of influence on the current culture in general, especially since they move a lot of money around. They're an extremely pragmatic generation. So a lot of them have many different side hustles and ways of making money, really value stability as a whole. Now, of course, yeah, especially if you are a part of this generation, that doesn't account for the individuals within each generation. But there are definitely going to be certain kids, teens who are passionate, especially about homelessness in general. There are going to be those that is the mantle that they choose to hold up, but they're extremely compassionate as a whole, fighting for equality, fighting for social justice, really believing that they have a voice and feeling empowered to use it and to be heard because of social media. And this is really rooted out of how they're highly individualistic, which you see on this slide. And they feel that others should also have the right to be as well. So that's a little bit about kind of who this generation is, and thinking about, hey, because they're so compassionate, even if homelessness is not the first issue on their minds, we can speak to the hearts of Gen Z to help them be more aware of maybe some issues that aren't right in front of them all the time.
Absolutely. You hit on so many themes that we want to come back to, Courtney. Thank you so much. Let's keep all of that in mind, about Gen Z, about the rising generation, as we dive in further and kind of just hear a little bit more about the nuances in regards to homelessness. So Andy, I want to ask you, sometimes something that I hear is, I just don't understand why these individuals experiencing homelessness can't just get a job. They can't just put on an outfit and go to a career fair and work hard and come out of their situation. And so I'm curious, could you share a little bit as to why it is more complex than that to exit homelessness?
Yeah, I think in the way that I'll frame this is in related to how we work with individuals who come through our doors who are looking for support, and in the 14 domains of vulnerability that you see in the slide here, these are all areas that we measure as an agency when we sit down to coach somebody to help them try and make a transition out of homelessness or out of poverty even. We recognize that it is not just a matter of income and employment, which is certainly a piece of it. If you don't have an income, if you're unemployed, then it can be difficult to pay the money to keep a house over your head, which is where that characterization comes from. But But you know, that's my grandfather used to say, well, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We're dealing with people that don't have straps or boots. They're lacking housing, they're lacking transportation. Health is a huge issue, both mental and physical health. And I think that the best way to kind of characterize that, if I think of myself, because I've got a strong family support and I've got savings and I've got a job and a car and a house, if I'm to lose something, if I have an accident and my health takes a dip, then I've got the savings, I've got a family I can rely on, I've got a house. If my car breaks down, then I can find other ways to do things. So often what happens for our homeless brothers and sisters is that they have multiple pieces breaking down simultaneously or have broken down. So there is no transportation, they don't have a place to stay at night. So even if they do get a job, it can be hard to keep that job and keep showing up on time. The health issues and substance abuse issues are a critical piece of a number of the individuals we work with who are dealing with homelessness. So it is, I think it's really important when we talk about that, the tendency to simplify and say, okay, well, let's just get straight. There are some individuals who can do that, and it is an amazing accomplishment. But sometimes that comes from a place of advantage, and we don't realize how many different pieces of our lives have to be working really well to keep us in the spaces we're in. So I think it's just understanding the complexities is around understanding all those different components of what makes a stable life stable, and recognizing that for some folks they may lose that, or as we talked about with the generational cycle of poverty and homelessness, kids grow up in it and never had it to begin with.
Sure. Mary, I'm curious to ask you what you're seeing at Mary's Home as far as prohibitive factors to exiting homelessness, things that keep people trapped in that cycle. But before I do that, though, I do want to put up another quick pop quiz for those of you who are in the audience. I want you to answer this question because it's kind of, well, we'll see if it's shocking to you or not. Maybe you guys are really on it with this. Oftentimes at tours at Mary's Home, we will ask and we'll find out some pretty surprising things with this one. How much does a single mom with 2 kids need to make annually in El Paso County in order to be self-sufficient? And by self-sufficient, we mean off subsidies. So I'm curious what you guys think. Go ahead and select one of the following. It's either 57,000, 41,000, or 27,000. So yeah, we often see that people will say something like, oh, you know, maybe 30,000, 35,000. Clearly, you guys have, wow, I'm really impressed. 81% of people actually got the correct answer, which is 57,000. Oh my goodness. I was blown away when I found this out. So at least most of the residents who are at Mary's Home, they don't even have a GED. And so I asked, how is someone supposed to make $57,000 a year if they don't even have a GED? So Mary, could you speak to that as far as what are you seeing at Mary's Home as things that are pretty difficult for people who want to exit homelessness?
Absolutely. Andy, I love those 14 domains that you spoke of. I think that so clearly defines the logistic issues that often those that are suffering from homelessness are trying to overcome. 14 different pieces: transportation, housing, childcare. Those are all so significant. And one thing that I greatly appreciate about the Mary's Home program, we recognize those 14 different pieces, but then we also want to go layers deeper. So the pieces that we really look at Mary's Home is looking at the lack of supportive relationships. So thus providing supportive relationships, looking at the emotional health. These are, again, as my son said, this is the pattern. Like there are teens that he knows of that could be homeless because their parents were homeless. So the trauma that just it is to be homeless, that is significant and takes time to heal. So looking at that emotional health, looking at the healthy life skills that are in place or aren't in place that contribute to homelessness. looking at, I think you said this, Andy, the multiple pieces that are breaking down all at once. It is all of those 14 logistical pieces, but then it's also the identity that these beautiful and incredible people are holding that is not true, that they can't get the job, they can't get the GED, they aren't worth the effort that it takes. I can't tell you how many moms have come into Mary's Home and they've walked into that new apartment that is beautifully decorated just for them and their children, and they say, I'm not worth all this. And we say, oh yes, you are. You are absolutely worth all this. There is a healing that has to take place. That breakdown, even in their identity, often contributes to the homelessness that they experience.
Absolutely. I'm sure many of the people on this webinar are somewhat familiar with Mary's Home, but could you give just a couple pieces kind of just related to this whole conversation of what is Mary's Home doing right now, Mary, to help support these single moms who are facing this huge challenge of exiting homelessness?
Perfect. Well, I always love talking about Mary's Home, so I have no problem with this question. So Mary's Home is a holistically designed program in which all areas of the mother, the child, the family is truly addressed. And I could spend the whole hour just talking about this, but I'm going to kind of make it a little bit briefer. So Mary's Home, when the family moves into Mary's Home, they go through phases, 3 specific phases. And the first phase is very foundational and restorative. It's healing. It's helping her exit that survival mindset and step into a peaceful mindset, into a capable mindset and an empowered mindset. So that first phase is very foundational and restorative in what she's learning and the activities that she's engaged in, and kind of settling into life at Mary's Home. And then she moves into career development or education. I love this about Mary's Home. It is educationally focused, whether it's the classes at Mary's Home or helping her get into college or a vocational degree, so that she can then, phase 3, step into her career. She can then begin a career, stabilize even in that, because again, that's another transition, into independent living and really being ready to be fully on her own and forever leave the cycle of poverty, the cycle of homelessness. Her children will never have to experience what she has experienced. So again, it's a 3 to 5 year program. As you can see, there's a lot of pieces that we dig deep into. But again, it's foundational in the beginning, career development or education focused, and then that career establishment and independent living.
Mary, I got a question in the question box I would just want to pop in here because it's about Mary's Home. Why the 3 or less kids under 9?
Because as Mary's Home is growing, you can see the picture here. This is our resident building right now. And these resident building, these are 17 apartments that are 1 bedroom. They're beautiful, they're sweet, they're about 400 square feet, but it is 1 bedroom. And so a mama is moving in with usually an infant and a toddler, and she's sharing a room with her children. But if she were to move in with 4 or 5 children, you can see how that would become an issue. Also, if she had older children, then that becomes an issue, because again, if she were to stay for 5 years and she moved in with her 9-year-old, that means that she's then sharing a room with her 14-year-old son, and that becomes a little bit complicated. However, we dream and we believe that Mary's Home will grow and we'll have 2 or 3 bedroom apartments, and we will be able to expand the care, the focus, and the criteria of families that we can serve.
Awesome. Awesome. Courtney, I want to ask you a quick question. As we listen to all of this, as we talk about this complexities, the multifaceted nature of this, it's heavy, you know, it's overwhelming. The plight of these young families at Dream Centers Mary's Home, of all the individuals that Catholic Charities is serving. We know there are many other organizations in Colorado Springs and nationally that are serving individuals experiencing homelessness. And I'm thinking of myself as a young teen. I distinctly remember as a 13-year-old encountering some of this brokenness in the world and some of this struggle, and becoming aware, oh, wow, not everybody has it like I do. You know, not everybody has 2 parents that love them and that are healthy, and not everyone is able to eat 3 meals a day and be in a stable home. And I was overwhelmed. I would say I felt frozen. And so I can't imagine now, like you mentioned, Courtney, you know, so many teens are on social media. They're seeing so many different inequality issues all across the board. And I'm just curious, do you have any advice specifically for how to talk to a teen who might be feeling that overwhelmed, to how to support them through that?
Yeah, that's definitely real, right? Because we are not, this next generation is not protected. Like I feel like even I was growing up and I'm in my 20s currently. So I think a key opportunity here as a parent or even just a caring adult of teens who are maybe seeing this is just to be aware of opportunities. I think that we have a really great opportunity as an adult in our teen's life to be able to, provide hope when it's needed, reminding that, yes, there are lots of issues, but that doesn't mean that there is nothing that can be done. But really, just even kind of getting out of that mindset that maybe so many of us as adults have grown up with. I mean, right? We used to talk about the talk. And that was just even this mindset of, it's going to be one conversation and it's going to be a really big deal. But I think that there is an opportunity here to kind of shift out of that mindset and instead to take advantage of the little moments that present themselves in our lives and in their lives. At Access, we call this the one conversation model, but it's really just about taking advantage of those opportunities that most likely will just already present themselves within your lives. Maybe they'll be asking a question. Maybe you're driving alongside the road and you see someone who appears to be homeless, and there's just questions there. And so allowing space to take care or take advantage of those opportunities. So with awareness, but also I would say that questions are a really powerful way to begin conversations and just keep them going. And especially if there's just this overwhelming sense of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, maybe dive into, what's really behind this? What about it is so heavy to you? And just exploring that rather than just trying to maybe band-aid it with the, hey, don't worry, Jesus has got this kind of deal. This generation is one that doesn't take the easy answers. I'm grateful for, but I guess it does make it harder, right? And so still diving into those conversations, even when we don't have all of the answers, but rather trying to explore it together.
Sure. What I hear you saying is, be willing to sit in the discomfort and explore hard, heavy topics with your teen. And I love that, Courtney. Mary, I want to ask you particularly, you work at an organization that serves individuals who are experiencing homelessness or coming out of homelessness, and you also have teens. So I'm curious, just in your day-to-day, what is this dialogue like for you guys?
I love talking with my kiddos about it. Obviously, they're exposed to quite a bit, being that I'm the program director of Mary's Home. In fact, I often bring my children to Mary's Home because I want their perspective to widen. It's so important that they recognize, I love, Courtney, how you're saying that this is a generation that isn't okay with just the simple answers. Jesus has got it, we don't have to pay attention. But that we expose them more and more to what is going on there, ask them and get their perspective. One question I was asking my children about this, and I was asking Jake, and I said, so why do you think it's hard for teens to talk about this? Why do you think the conversation is hard? And he said, well, the homelessness is such a diverse topic. There's so many issues that contribute to homelessness that sometimes it feels overwhelming to begin the conversation because we want to fix it. The social justice piece, Courtney, that you were talking about. But he also said, but the more we talk about it, the more we can come up with solutions. And so we shy away from what's uncomfortable, especially if there's a tension and we don't know how to fix it. We don't have the immediate solution, but it's in the conversations that the solutions come. And so just being the director of Mary's Home and seeing that that is actually how it happens, people just step in and say, I have no idea. I don't know what to do, but I'm here and I want to be present and I want to be a part of it. And when they do, it immediately steps into answers, steps into solutions. So stepping in and just saying, whatever it is, I want to be a part of it, that leads to the solutions.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm curious to ask you, both Mary and Andy, whoever wants to answer this one, can you educate us for a second, just really nuts and bolts about terms, about, the types of words we use? Are there do's or don'ts in this conversation? Are there words to avoid? Are there maybe ways we could talk about the issue of homelessness that might be dehumanizing without us really recognizing it?
I will be interested to hear how Mary handles this as well. For us, I think, here again, it goes back to the observation made at the beginning that we're individuals experiencing homelessness are people living through a situation. But I think when we talk about homelessness, we will refer to our homeless instead of the homeless. We will refer to individuals experiencing homelessness rather than homeless people. I think that language really does matter in the ways we talk about it, and certainly terminology like vagrants and bums and hobos is not helpful. So the other piece that I think is really important around that from my perspective is acknowledging the humanity of individuals experiencing homelessness when we see it, because I think we tend to be programmed to look away for a variety of different reasons, not out of callousness necessarily, but just out of discomfort. And the act of looking away from another individual is pretty devastating, regardless of the experience that individual is having. So, I have told people and have told my kids that one of the most important things we can do for individuals whom we may know or think is experiencing homelessness is make eye contact and say hello. There are some situations where that may not work, but the majority of the time, I think that's the right thing to do. It's recognizing the humanity in people and not pretending like it's not there.
Andy, I love that. I think that is probably the most important thing to hang on to when trying to address this issue. I was asking my daughter, who's 11, I said, what do you think it feels like for somebody in your classroom who may be experiencing homelessness? And she goes, oh, they must feel scared. They must feel ashamed, even though it has nothing to do with, they have not brought this on. They must feel awkward. They must feel out of place. And I said, okay, so interesting. So then, but how do you see them? And she goes, I see them as who they are. And I said, so what is the difference there? And she goes, I want them to experience me seeing them for who they are, not for what their situation is. And I think that, Andy, you're touching directly on that. The hidden homeless, especially, and all homeless, people that are experiencing that, they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they don't feel valued, they don't feel that they belong. So the best thing that we can do for anyone who is experiencing a situation of homelessness, it does not identify them. It is something that they're walking through. And just as I need to be heard and seen and feel that I belong and I have value, so do the rest of us, all of us. So what can we do to actually step in and see and hear value and create belonging? By that eye contact, by having the conversation. Somebody who's different than me shouldn't be somebody that I avoid. It should be somebody that I'm curious about. I want to know and want to step in and support if at all possible.
I love that. I want to jump right off of that, Mary, because I'm curious to ask both you and Andy, what are just some practical signs that a teen can watch out for that might indicate a peer might be homeless? And I'm curious, let's say you mentioned your daughter, Mary, maybe who knows somebody who's experiencing homelessness in her classroom. I'm just curious, what are the signs they can look out for? And then also, if they do notice that, what do they do with that? Who do they tell? What ways can they bring support around that peer without, drawing undue attention to them or making them feel uncomfortable?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, my conversation with my son around this, I thought was really interesting. So I was asking him, what can you look for to see if there may be somebody in your classroom or in your school that may be experiencing the homelessness? And he goes, well, I bet just because of how they feel about themselves, they may have trouble in school. They may have anger problems. They may have some behavioral problems, which of course, they're experiencing trauma, so it's going to come out. They also said they might kind of shy away or keep to themselves because they're ashamed of, it's been a week since I've had a shower, or whatever that may be. So looking for some of those, he said, look for those that are different than me, because just the curiosity will give them a space to eventually be able to say whatever it may be. And then he was saying some of the things that he would want to do is he'd want to make sure he let the school counselor know, hey, I'm concerned about Jack, Jack in my class, he just seems like he's off, and I don't know, I'm just concerned. Is there anything that I can do? Just letting the school counselor know. But then he also just said, there could be easy things that I do, just kind of hang out and just invite him, hey, do you want to hang out and play soccer at the park later today? Giving him an option to be in a space that's other than school, where he's trying so hard to keep those walls up. And then through that, let there be conversations. My daughter was saying, she's like, well, maybe there's a sweatshirt that I don't really want anymore, and I can just accidentally oh, I don't like this color. Do you like this color? You could have this one. She said, maybe if I packed an extra large lunch and, just didn't need it, and said, hey, do you want to take this? My mom makes it and I don't like it, but maybe you could take it home, whatever those pieces are. But again, creating the conversation, creating the relationship so that there can be the conversation if that were to come up. And then of course, Jake and Addie said that, they would let me know, and they would let their school counselor know. They, of course, were sweetly saying, we'd want to pray for them and just ask the Lord to, step in and open doors for them, for their parents, whatever that might be. But I think that, it's not always just handing $5. It's not, hey, do you need a toothbrush? Here's a toothbrush. Addie's like, that would be the most embarrassing thing. So wanting to be really relational and even having the conversation and finding ways to support. Those are just some of the things that they came up with that I thought were kind of cool and interesting.
Fantastic. Andy, do you have anything to add to that, just as far as signs, and then also what teens could do to step in and support, if anything?
That was such a fabulous response. The one piece that I would reiterate, or maybe the two, the one other situation that I think homelessness contributes to with students that can be pretty profound is attendance, right? So it's hard to get to school. Attendance can be one of the main issues, but that whole notion that Mary talked about relationship, in its relationships are so much better than transactions, and I think young people, especially in this generation, are really, really good at that. And so I think it's, in a lot of ways, looking for signs is less important than treating our neighbors as we would treat ourselves.
I love that. Well said. Well said. Mary, you also, I want to highlight, you said something about, creating relationship that might lead to conversation with individuals that might be individually or experiencing a struggle. And I'm curious, Courtney, I think that there's a similar dynamic between adults and teens. So maybe, it sounds like Mary is having this conversation frequently, conversations with her son and daughter. But what about a parent who might be listening to this webinar, or a youth pastor, or whoever who's a caring adult, and they may never have had these types of conversations before. They may not even know how to begin. I'm curious, let's say there's a parent on this webinar who wants to advocate for people experiencing homelessness. They have a heart about this issue. They're passionate to start addressing. What are maybe 3 do's and 3 don'ts as they begin to have this dialogue with their teen for maybe the first time?
Yeah. Okay, so starting with just the 3 things that you should do. I already kind of mentioned it before. Just use moments that happen every day. Working with thousands and thousands of parents myself, I think we're all waiting for this perfect moment, or when we feel ready or prepared, and it's just never going to come. And so utilizing what we actually have today, either in media that comes up, or even just situations that you guys experience as a family. Actually, my friends and I were just talking about this the other day, how we personally had not ever, we learned from our parents how to interact with people who may be experiencing homelessness. And I was taught, don't make eye contact. Exactly things that Mary, you and Andy were talking about. So we are going to be learning, kids are going to be learning how to interact with those who are maybe in different situations than us by watching. So that kind of brings up the second do is to think through how you personally interact with this issue. If this is something that especially you are passionate about as an adult, are you living out your passion for this issue? Are your kids seeing you talk about it and help doing something? This generation really values authenticity and people being congruent with what they say and with what they do. So you want your kid to be, if you want your kid to be passionate about this, then demonstrate that passion. So thinking through, how am I living this out? Because we learn best by watching typically. The third do, have this conversation side by side. Having a conversation face to face can feel a little overwhelming and sometimes pressure filled, both for you and your teen. So trying to have this conversation while doing something else can actually be a lot more comfortable for everyone and sometimes produce really better conversation. Now, more on the don't side. So first, don't bulldoze. A lot of times when we're passionate about something, we can just bulldoze over other people, wanting to convince people, push an idea. Yes, even if it matters, that's still not a helpful way to communicate. So instead, try getting curious. Remember asking those questions, setting aside your agenda to see, maybe this issue isn't the one that they're crazy passionate about, but maybe give space for them to talk about what they're passionate about as well, and just have a conversation together about the issues that really pull on your heartstrings. Second, don't forget to utilize others around you. Maybe you as a parent really wish that your kids always listen to you, but as you probably have experienced, because you are their parent, they may not want to listen to you. And so don't be afraid to utilize the other adults that are in your teens' lives to be able to say the exact same things. We can either be discouraged by that or realize that there are grandparents and family friends and church members and teachers that might just in this stage be able to speak to the heart of your kids, maybe in a more clear way than you can at the moment. And then the last one, don't just talk. Think outside the box, really. It doesn't just have to be a conversation, because this generation learns truth through emotion and experience. So is there something that you can do where they can, make this issue apparent and real for them personally? Can you all volunteer together? So thinking outside the box, not just leaving it at talking, but actually trying to experience something is going to be really helpful to kind of drive it home for the next generation.
Love that, Courtney. You literally could not have led better into the next slide. I'm curious to hear from Andy and from Mary. What are a couple practical suggestions? Let's say there's a teen on this webinar who wants to get involved, or a parent on this webinar who wants to, as Courtney said, help their teen and go alongside their teen to learn this truth through experience. What are a couple things they can do practically?
I'll jump in on that one. Okay, so I love this question because some of the most impactful experiences that the residents of Mary's Home have felt is when teens come and do something. There was one event that happened about 2 years ago. It was this group of teens from out of state, and they were coming to Colorado Springs, and they wanted to do something for Mary's Home. And they came, they did a great service day. They were painting events. They were, I can't remember, there's a few different things, but it wasn't about the activity. When these moms saw these teens coming and loving them by being a part of their community, it blew them away. So I always say, bring your teens, let the teens come in, because they really have so much impact. So a couple things that are coming up. We have City Serve, October 3rd, and it is such a fun event. I mean, families, teens, many different churches come in and they participate. We have like 75 to 100 people here at Mary's Home doing various projects and various things, but it's getting your feet dirty, getting into it, that really help people see that they really can be part of the solution. resource drives. Oh my gosh, we've had a couple teams do this where they actually come and they'll do some sort of resource drive, whether it's diapers or toilet paper, paper towels. These are things that we give to the residents. And so that's such a cool way because there's also an education piece that comes with it. It's more than just, hey, classmates, bring a roll of toilet paper, but it's bring a roll of toilet paper for this organization that helps these mamas and kiddos that are working to overcome homelessness. So again, it brings the conversation up again. Adopt a child or a family during the holidays. There's so many cool events that teens, families can become a part of where they can get to know a family enough to contribute. In fact, one thing that, Courtney, I love everything that you said about those do's and don'ts. One thing that I just jotted down that I actually want to talk with my kiddos about is create stories for individuals that are experiencing homelessness rather than generalities of an unknown group. So make it personal, get to know the story or create the story. What do you think is happening with that guy that we just drove by? So really creating the story. And then finally, I love when teens, and we've had even a young woman, I think she was 9 or 10 at the time, she did a lemonade stand, and all of her funds, everything that she got from her lemonade stand, she brought to Mary's Home. And so she had a check of, I don't know, I can't remember, it was like $37. But she knew enough about Mary's Home and what was going on here that she wanted to contribute. So she actually wrote notes for the 15 different families that we had then, and then gave her check for $37. How amazing is that? Like, this young woman is going to change the world because she is willing to step in and be a part. So there's often opportunities, and we love this, as well as the really creative ideas about how to get involved.
Awesome. Andy, how about you? Anything to add?
Yeah, so like Mary and Mary's Home, our reliance on volunteers is so critical in the work that we do, and teens can be really dynamic volunteers in our spaces. So our volunteers serve meals every day of the week, and there are opportunities for teens to volunteer to do that. There's some restriction around age, just by virtue of the population that we're serving. So some younger teens we ask to be accompanied by their parent, which I think fits in with what Courtney was saying in terms of parents' opportunities to do things side by side. And lots of parents with their young people come in to volunteer at the soup kitchen. All that information is available on our website, which is charitiescc.org. So we try to make it really easy to sign up to volunteer and to find your shifts. We also participate in CityServe, although the projects that we have typically will depend. We don't have those yet, but we will be a part of that. And I think that CityServe piece plays into a larger point that I would make just in general. Our faith community, regardless of denomination throughout Colorado Springs, really does powerful work around the populations we serve. A lot of churches are engaged in this work, and youth groups through there. So I think engaging, for those who are involved with the faith community, engaging in that way can be a really good way to do it as well, just because it's another path in. And then I think especially for older teens, as young men and women are finishing high school, getting ready to go on to college and that type of thing, we're dealing with systems that are broken, and I really hope that there's generational change on the way, and that comes from being educated. It comes from advocating. I love that Courtney talked about social justice, because I think that is critical, not only in the time that we're in right now, but just in general, in terms of how are we going to make big changes to the world we live in, and it's going to come from this group. So the hands-on stuff is really important. There's plenty of opportunities with other organizations as well, but educating and paying attention to the issue, I think, is a way that we can start looking at the needle in the years to come.
Fantastic. I love just the hope that I'm hearing from both of you. Yes, The issue of homelessness is significant, it's multifaceted, it's complex, we've heard all about that, but there is so much hope, and there are ways to get involved, and there are ways to be part of the solution. Okay, so we're gonna hop into Q&A here, and I know we only have a few minutes left, so if you guys could keep it to maybe, no pressure, 30 seconds-ish per question. But the first one I just wanna highlight is, are there resources you can point me to as a parent on how to step into this uncomfortable zone with my teens? And I wanna direct this one to Courtney. Would you share a little bit about the Culture Translator?
Yes, for sure. So the Culture Translator is our free weekly email that you can sign up for, and it basically just gives you a pulse on what's happening in teen culture and then how to have conversations about it. So you'll just become more familiar with kind of normal things that are happening, and you'll get used to talking about harder, more uncomfortable topics. And so that's a really great way just to feel prepared in general to maybe talk about something like homelessness.
Awesome. The Culture Translator is amazing. Can't recommend it enough. Every parent on this webinar, I would recommend you sign up for that. Okay, so the next question is, I've been of the opinion that giving a homeless person or person experiencing homelessness cash enables them not to seek help through various social services here in Colorado Springs. I feel it is better to support agencies who address the needs of the homeless. Andy, would you go ahead and share your thoughts on this question? Do you agree? Do you disagree, and why?
Yeah, no, we would agree with that wholeheartedly, just because, practically because there are so many organizations that are trying to work around this issue that we can stretch a dollar a little bit further. The other piece I would say, and this goes back to something Mary said, handing someone $1 or $5 is transactional, and we really believe fundamentally that this is a problem that we solve through relationship, and so the panhandling doesn't allow a relationship. It just allows us to give $1 or $2 and go another way.
Love that. So smile, say hello, maybe get to know somebody if you have a few minutes, but giving some cash is not the best solution. Rather give to social services agencies. Awesome. Okay, so next question I want to direct to you, Mary. What are some ways that you help families move out of survival mode? What does that look like?
When a family is in survival mode, they literally can't even think about next week. They're thinking about tonight, where they're sleeping, what they're eating, if their kids will be able to go to school tomorrow. So to help a resident to move, or anyone who's experiencing homelessness, to move out of survival mode into a more stable place, they first need to feel empowered. And in order to feel empowered, there are very key pieces. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are very key pieces that need to be in place in order for them to stabilize enough to not have to go to survival. So I highly recommend anyone and everyone who's on this to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's really the basic pieces first, and then stepping into identity, security, relationships, support, all of those. So again, start with relationships, look them in the eye. If there's a need that you can meet or get them into a resource that can help them stabilize, that will help them move from survival into empowered.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to take a minute to thank everybody for joining. Thank you so much for just all the attendees who've taken time out of your busy day to be here. Thank you so much, both adults and teens, for joining us. And thank you also, Mary, Andy, and Courtney. Just so many fantastic thoughts. I know I'm going to be thinking about a lot of what you guys shared. So I appreciate you as our panelists. For everybody who's on this webinar, keep your eye peeled on your email for upcoming webinars. Dream Centers is going to continue to have these conversations, and so you'll get info in your inbox about upcoming webinars. But thank you guys so much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.